When I use mine, it's not that you can't use it to strip poly or flatten a floor. In fact, one of the nice things about it is if I get into an area like a small closet or there's a perpendicular hallway or something like that, I actually carry a little bit rougher paper, typically around a 40 grit, slap that on it, and then it will rough off a floor. Like it'll take the poly off, it'll rough it off, it'll flatten it. Takes a little bit longer than a big machine, but also, in my opinion, is a little bit faster than an edger. So you definitely can do that in some tricky, hard to get to areas, and then make sure that you're coming back and sanding those aggressive marks out. So
absolutely, it's definitely better as far as what you were saying is the edger is concerned, because you're cutting 16-inch swaths at a time, right? As opposed to a 7-inch, with your edger. So, yeah, that, like you said, it brings up a great point, is the versatility that it gives you on, say, pattern floors or less than optimal direction, cuts. When it comes to, say, like a closet or a space underneath the stairs, or a mud room where the, or a hallway where the wood runs perpendicular to the direction, that the long run of a hall, or, but you can also use it around the kitchen island, so it gives you a lot of versatility in that regard. Like I said, with pattern floors, whether it be, chevron or herringbone or parquets, anything like that, any multiple designs, things of that nature, because you're not having to go with the grain. It really gives you that versatility to be able to cut those floors and not have to worry about, those issues that come with, going against the grain when you're sanding.
I know we've talked about your finishes. I know we talked about your stains, and we're jumping into a totally new category here. I think today we're going to be talking about your machines and the Powerdrive specifically. So why don't you just introduce yourself? And I think everybody should know about Bona by this point. They probably knew about it before any of our series, but tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Bona.
My name is Jason Owen. I'm the TM, or the territory manager, for Oklahoma and Texas. So I actually have 5 Masterscraft branches in my territory. So great partnership with you guys. I also I'm actually right now in our training facility. We have a regional training center here in Addison, Texas, which is just a suburb of Dallas, so virtually Dallas. But we also host sand and finish schools here, which we do on a routine basis. So
awesome. Well, I think today you wanted to talk about the Powerdrive and kind of highlight some of the features of that. So planetary sanders are probably what I would call the newest category to sanders. For sure, I wouldn't say that they're brand new. They've been around a little while, but certainly your Powerdrive is, considering the number of years wood floors have been put in, it's newer to the market. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Powerdrive and some of the features of it?
So the nice thing about a Powerdrive is, first and foremost, it's 2 machines in one. First, it's a sanding machine, rotary planetary sanding machine. It actually is gear driven. With that gear driven plate that's on there, it actually gives you control whenever sanding a floor. You can sand a floor from start to finish with it, because whenever you take that plate off, you can put a standard buffing plate, 16-inch buffing plate on there as well, or a multi-disc that you can actually use to either screen or buff. You're taking it from a sander and now you transition it to a buffer. Whenever you're sanding with the machine, because of those gears, it actually gives you control. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about it. There's 4 things, real quick. There's 4 things in our system, in the Bona system, that I view as game changers in the industry. One is the Powerdrive, the ease of use that you're able to make a novice feel like an expert. A guy that has never sanded a floor before can use the Powerdrive and honestly feel like, man, this ain't that hard. I mean, I've done demos at your facilities before, to where I've gotten the counter girls or you know, people who've never even touched a sander. I had one demo that I did at your facility where one of the contractors actually brought their wife, who doesn't do floors, and I actually got her behind the Powerdrive, and she was like, "Oh my goodness," you know. So it makes a novice feel like an expert. It gives you that versatility.
So yeah, I think just real quick, not that we want to go too far down the rabbit hole of the technology, but essentially that gear drive is, as the big head moves around, it's got 4 small heads that spin in a counter rotation.
Correct.
As far as I know, and full disclosure to everybody, I own a Powerdrive, so Jason can correct all of my wrong opinions that I formed. That does 2 things. One is it basically turns, when you put that geared sanding head on, it turns that head into basically a giant random orbital sander. So you're not getting those 16-inch swirl patterns that you have to clock when you do a floor. You're getting any direction you want to go, forward, back, parallel, perpendicular to the boards, however you want to go. It's giving you a totally random sanding pattern. And then 2, like you talked about, the ease of use. Basically, you're not running it like a buffer. You're just running it with the handle up. You're pushing it like a shopping cart, and anybody can pull the handle and just walk right beside it or right behind it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that ease of use, because that gearhead gives the machine control. Mm-hmm. It is actually you're able to ride, for lack of a better term, right along the baseboards. It reduces your edging by 80%. You're cutting within 1.5 inches of those baseboards, and so you can just ride along those baseboards and virtually cut the floor. So it's nice to be able to do that. Obviously, you're saving time, so it's kind of a plus and minus. It's a slower moving machine, so you're not going to be winning any speed races or anything like that, but you're giving yourself more control and more consistency as far as a cut is concerned when it comes to using that machine.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I hear with that, a lot of guys would say, and you said this, so interested to ferret this out a little bit, that you can sand the whole floor with a Powerdrive. And that is technically true. I have found, when you're taking off old poly or you're really trying to sand out and flatten a floor, oftentimes it's easiest to use the big machine on the first cut, and then everything is the Powerdrive. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, it's so, like I said before, you can sand a whole floor from start to finish with that machine. But it will not be, it's not optimal. I say that it's not meant to necessarily replace the big machine, but it definitely is a great complement. So, like you said, I'm going to use that big machine because of the speed and the aggressiveness that it has. I'm still going to use that big machine for my first cut, to flatten that floor, to take off, that heavy finish if you're resanding a floor, but definitely to rough off a floor, I'm going to use the big machine. Then I'm going to put that thing in the truck, and I'm getting the Powerdrive and doing all my intermediate cuts, as well as taking that gear head off, putting a buffer plate on there or a multi-disc, and then I'm doing my finishing passes with it as well. Whenever, like I said, whenever you take that gear head off, you've stopped it becoming a cutting machine, and you've turned it into a buffer. So, as you alluded to, as far as handle position, whenever you're using it as a sander, you want the handle as much 90 degrees as possible. There's a kind of a switch that allows you the power when it has a safety connection switch at the bottom. So whenever you'll hear a click, that's when the motor is operational and works, and that's about where you want to use it. A lot of times it's got a foldable handle, so guys who are worried about how high it is as far as height is concerned, you can actually fold that handle down a little bit, and for use it as at a lower height to be able to do that. But you want to use, when you're sanding with it, you want as much vertical weight, on that floor as possible. When you take that gear head off, you can you're taking that control away. So now it's like a buffer. And so you're going to operate it like a buffer. You're going to lower that handle down. You're going to put it on your hip, and control it just like a buffer and use it in that manner.
Right. Gotcha. And then another real quick point to address, I guess, as well. When I use mine, it's not that you can't use it to strip poly or flatten a floor. In fact, one of the nice things about it is if I get into an area like a small closet, or there's a perpendicular hallway or something like that, I actually carry a little bit rougher paper, typically around a 40 grit, slap that on it, and then it will rough off a floor. Like, it'll take the poly off, it'll rough it off, it'll flatten it. Takes a little bit longer than a big machine, but also, in my opinion, is a little bit faster than an edger. So you definitely can do that in some tricky, hard to get to areas, and then make sure that you're coming back and sanding those aggressive marks out. So
absolutely, it's definitely better as far as what you were saying is the edger is concerned, because you're cutting 16-inch swaths at a time, right? As opposed to a 7-inch, with your edger. So, yeah, that, like you said, it brings up a great point, is the versatility that it gives you on, say, pattern floors or less than optimal direction, cuts. When it comes to, say, like a closet or a space underneath the stairs, or, a mud room where or a hallway where the wood runs perpendicular to the direction, that the long run of a hall, or, but you can also use it around the kitchen island, so it gives you a lot of versatility in that regard. Like I said, with pattern floors, whether it be, chevron or herringbone or parquets, anything like that, any multiple designs, things of that nature, because you're not having to go with the grain. It really gives you that versatility to be able to cut those floors and not have to worry about, those issues that come with, going against the grain when you're sanding.
Right. So let's talk a little bit. I know you've got some different attachments and features that you guys add on to the Powerdrive. So I think you've got, let's see, you do wire brush heads, you've got some steel hard plates, and then you also have like a weight kit. So let's kind of go through those and talk about some of the advantages of those. Let's start with the wire brush kit. What does the wire brush kit look like, and how would a guy use that on the machine?
Okay, so this is actually a wire brush puck. Okay, one of 4 that actually go on that 6-inch. The Powerdrive gear plate has 4 6-inch pads on that, and it's just hook and loop. As you can see the back there, it's just a hook and loop, just like you would be applying your disc papers on there. So the wire brush, stainless steel, so they will bite you to an extent. You definitely want, in the wire brush kit, whenever you get that, it actually has a pair of gloves, mechanic gloves, that you definitely want to use just to save yourself from punctures and things of that nature, because like I said, they do bite. But they are, believe it or not, with that hook and loop, it actually is a firm hold on there. And one of the things we also include in the wire brush kit is a 5-in-1 tool. Its purpose is honestly to be able to pry those pucks off, because you'll notice that it's very hard to get those pucks off. So so with those wire brush pucks, what that does is, again, it expands the versatility of the machine. And so now not only is it just a sander and a buffer, but you're also able to wire brush with it. Wire brushing has become more and more popular in the States over the years here, especially within the last 5 years or so. It's been popular over in Europe for many, many years, and has trickled over to the US. So being able to utilize that on site really gives you another offering, if you will, to be able to expand your, as a contractor, expand your versatility when it comes to, not only can you smooth finish a floor, I'm sure hand scraping is still something that, you're able to do, but now, like I said, you can add wire brushing on site as part of your repertoire.
Gotcha. So the first question I have about that, I've never used the wire brush kit on my Powerdrive, but I imagine a question a lot of people would have would be, hey, if I put that on and it's just randomly spinning on the floor, aren't I going to get like swirl marks all over the floor? So if I wire brush it and then I go to stain it, isn't going to have swirl marks everywhere?
So believe it or not, yes, that is a concern. Okay. And that's the biggest, the thing that you automatically jump to. But believe it or not, because just as you sand, just as you don't get, a lot of those swirls whenever you sand, you're not getting those swirls when it comes to the wire brush pucks. Now, there might be some minute scratches, but after you've reached the level of dish out that you want in that soft grain when it comes to those wire brushes, after you've reached the level that you want, the next step is we also have the same size, what they're called Tinex brushes, that you're actually able to utilize, and that helps soften off those edges, takes some of that the burr, if you will, off of the wood whenever you've wire brushed. Real quickly, we highly recommend using basically water as you go through that process to keep those. There's 3 reasons that you use water whenever you're wire brushing. It's to honestly to keep that dust control down. You're still using dust control when it comes to the machine, hooked up to a vacuum, but you want to keep that dust control down. 2, you want to keep the wire brushes themselves cool, because can you run it hot? Yes. But if you run it cool, that water actually keeps the wire brushes cooler, and they actually will last a lot longer in that regard.
So just real quick, would that be, like most guys are going to water pop with a garden sprayer or something like that, wipe on? Is that just kind of something you want to wet the wood right before you're going over it?
I honestly, the way that I operate with it is I take that garden sprayer and I'm wetting the floor in small swath sections. Okay. And basically I find a good pace of using when I'm wire brushing is to basically dry the floor as I go.
Gotcha.
It's wet on one side. As I pass through, I want it to be dry on the other side. And then check the floor and see if that's, the level of wire brush that you want. You may need to repeat that process to get a little bit more aggressive. It's kind of like hand scrape to an extent, right? Whenever you're hand scraping on site, you're able to go as light or as heavy as you want. Always start out light, and you can always go heavier as you go.
Gotcha. And then I think you had also mentioned like one of the ways that you could take any of the minute scratching out. Let's say if someone's going with a real dark stain, is to take like 120 grit and go over the floor with 120 grit after you've wire brushed it, right? And that
right. If you don't have the Tinex brushes, that's what I recommend is using 120 grit diamond. On there, I like to use it when I'm using diamond. It's made to diamond abrasives. It's made to feather, on a floor and to take out your minute scratches and things of that nature, whether it be sanding or wire brush, right? So you can actually put the 120 diamonds on there with some intermediate pads, whether it be on the gear head or on a multi-disc. I prefer in that instance to use a multi-disc because I'm floating. The gear head's going to add a little bit more aggression because, when you use a gear head, the machine is determining the spin of those pads, to where if you're using a multi-disc, the floor is really determining the spin of those pads. And so you don't want to be as aggressive. You don't want to take away some of that dishing out that you just created on the floor. So you're just really trying to smooth out, take out some of that, like I said, that burr, or take out some of the minute scratches that any of the wire brushes have left.
Awesome. Okay. So that kind of answers most of my questions about the wire brushing. The other thing that you guys make is the weight kit. And I think the new
I'm going to grab some real quick. Hold on just a second, right behind me here.
You know, pump some of those for us, do some curls. So you guys that weight kit for the machine in both the old machines, like mine was an old machine, and I got a retrofit kit, which was not very hard. Took me 30 minutes to fit the weight kit on there.
Right.
And I think the new machines they come set up for the weight kit. But let's talk a little bit about how much weight you can add to that machine, and what that adds in terms of versatility, and then also when would a guy use a weight kit?
Okay, so the weight kit itself, each one of these are actually 15 pounds. Mm-hmm. So they actually, when you get a weight kit, it actually comes with two. So a total of 30 pounds are what you're adding to that machine. Do you have to use 30 pounds every time? Absolutely not. It just depends on how aggressive that you want to be, right? So I use it a lot when I'm wire brushing, depending upon how aggressive that I want to be. The more weight, the more aggressive I'm going to be. So in the weight kit itself, it actually comes with the posts that you're able to, like you were talking about, you're able to add those on top of the chassis, and then these just stack on top of each other. They're made to where they're able to stack very, very easily and lock in whenever they're on top of that chassis. But, like you said, as far as the retro is concerned, the older machines, we have a retrofit weight kit, as well as your standard weight kit, that because all of the newer power drives have a pre-drilled chassis with little bitty plugs on top of that you can just pop those out and actually screw your posts right in there to be able to start using the weights. Gotcha. So just like I said, it really comes down to aggression and how aggressive that you want to be in obviously using those weights.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like the weight kit. Obviously when you're in the lower grits and you're trying to either clean off the floor or flatten it, anywhere between 40 and 60, sometimes 80 grit. The thing I like about it, it adds weight to the nose of the power drive.
Absolutely.
Put a lot of weight on the handle, and so which is fine if you want to treat it like a buffer and kind of feather with the back cutting a little bit harder than the front. But when you add those weights, it seems to even it out a little bit. And also just, I guess the power drive's not a fast machine, but it does speed it up just a little bit in terms of the cutting speed I found.
Absolutely. It gives you a little bit more aggression, like I said. I mean, before we actually came out with the weight kit, people were wanting to add, looking at different ways to add weight, to the machine. And I've seen some pretty creative ways, that they've done that using, tire hubs and different things of that nature, trying to put those on there. The nice part about it is that it actually sits on the chassis. So it's at the lowest point, of the machine to be able to centralize that weight and to actually give you more aggression on the nose, like you said, of the machine, because that's where, when you have a rotary machine, there's a cut point, right? And so you want to maximize that cut point where it's at, and generally on most of your machines in that regard, it's towards the nose, and so you want to be able to put that at the lowest point, which is where those set.
Gotcha. And then just real quick, like at one point I was running my machine with 100 grit paper and weights on it, and I forget who I talked to at Bona, but you guys recommended, hey, when you get into those higher grits, sometimes 80, probably around 100, you kind of want to take those weights off, which was a little bit counterintuitive to me at first, but then I realized, when you get into a higher grit, you've got more surface area of that paper in contact with the floor. So it's actually a little bit harder for the machine to turn that. And I guess the upshot of that was every now and then my machine would shut off. And then I realized I didn't really need that weight kit in the higher grits to get as good of a sanding job as well.
Right. I mean, so like we said, so when you get in that higher grit, you're really trying to, I mean, for lack of a better term, from your very first cut, it's to put in the rough off that floor, and every pass after that first pass is basically to soften those cuts, right? And so you're basically trying to take that aggression out. And so once you get into those higher grits, yeah, you definitely want to take those weight kits off, or those weights off, because you're trying to you're not really trying to be aggressive or cut that floor anymore. You're trying to take out those cuts, and that's what gives you that. Like I said, when you get in those higher cuts, you're basically trying to feather the floor at that point.
So 2 other things I want to hit real quick. The steel plates. Had a question. Somebody asked, hey, when do I use the steel plates? Should I use them for all the cuts? Should I use them for the later cuts, the earlier cuts? And just to give guys a real quick preview, the steel plates are some 6-inch discs that hook and loop on. And instead of the interface pads, which provide a little bit of softening, you could think of like a buffer pad that you're using between the head and the screen. This is like a hard plate. So
exactly.
When is a guy going to use that steel hard plate on the Powerdrive? What grits do you recommend using that on?
So honestly, I like using the for lack of a better term, the hard plating. I like using that process in my intermediate cuts because I'm really trying to make sure that I'm getting an aggressive flatness, especially if I'm using that right after I had my initial cut. I'm gonna put those steel plates on there to try to make sure that I'm getting flat, a flat cut in that regard. So generally in my intermediate cuts, I'm using those hard plates. I'm taking those off. Like I said, when I'm taking off the gear head, and I'm putting on the multi-disc to feather a floor over my final passes.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And then I guess the only other comment that I would have in terms of a guy looking at buying a machine like that is and you can comment on this whether right or wrong, but I've kind of found this kind of a machine is a vacuum required machine. It puts out a lot of dust, and more than just the dust it puts out in the house. Like, in order for that machine to sand well, you're looking at having to clear all that dust out from under it as you go along. So could you comment on that a little bit?
So the thing that I would say when it comes to Bona, all of our machines that we make are made with dust containment in mind. Dust containment is it's almost a requirement for any type of certification in our industry these days because of the health as well as the cleanliness. But to be honest with you, when you use dust containment with your machines, you're protecting your investment. I've been on job sites to where guys are just using, like say on the big machine, they're just using the bag, the collection bag that comes with it. They don't realize that if they're using dust containment, they're putting less stress. Not only are they keeping the environment more clean, it does obviously a lot better job as far as collecting that dust. But whenever you use dust containment on a machine, you're giving that machine a longer life to an extent because you're putting less stress on that machine and on that motor when it comes to that. But it's imperative anymore, to use dust containment. Like I said, for any type of certification, your homeowner's going to like it. It's a great opportunity to be able to upsell to your customer, but at the same time, you're keeping yourself healthy as well because of the oak dust in the air actually becomes a carcinogen. And so, there's those 3 levels of why you would want to use dust containment.
Gotcha. All right. Last question that I typically ask for any product is, if a guy was going to get this product and really mess it up, besides putting holes in somebody's drywall, how would somebody mess up the Powerdrive? Or what are the pitfalls, the easy pitfalls to avoid?
I would say, honestly, like I said, the machine is so easy to use, right? But where I see contractors somewhat struggle, but not really, is the first thing that they want to do is lower that handle. Like I said, whenever you're using it as a sanding piece of equipment, just because it looks like a buffer, right? But it looks like a buffer on steroids. So the one thing that I would say is, whenever you're using it as a sander, try to keep that handle as vertical as possible, because you want vertical weight. You want that weight to stay. If you lower that, say you don't have the weight kit, on there, and you're using that, you just have an opportunity to heal, that machine, and you don't want to do that when it comes to obviously having a consistent flat cut in that regard. One thing that I would say is, because it is a 220 machine, anything 220, whether it be the Powerdrive or your big machine, I highly recommend using a power station or a power converter in that regard, so that you know exactly what power that you're getting to your machine. Different spaces, you don't know exactly what power is going to be coming out of that wall, whether it be a commercial space or a residential space. And so being able to know exactly what you're putting to your machine, again, is another way that you're safeguarding your investment of the machine, because if you run it too hot, you have a likelihood of lowering that amperage threshold that comes to the that voltage threshold that comes on to the machine. It's a 220. The older ones were wound to 220. The newer ones are wound to 240. But I highly recommend running them consistently as close to 220 as possible, so that you're able to work within that. But again, sometimes you need to buck that power down, or you need to bump that power up to make sure that you're getting the right voltage to your machine to work at its optimal level.
So sand and run it right, and use the power station so that you're not blowing out your multi-$1,000 investment. So
exactly.
Awesome. Well, Jason, we appreciate you being on with us, giving us some info on the Powerdrive, and giving us some tips and tricks and techniques for guys to use. So appreciate that, and thanks for all the info, man.
Hey, thank you for having us. We appreciate all the partnerships that we have with Masters Craft.
Awesome. All right, guys, appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time on Pro Shop Talk.